Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
Hello and welcome to On the Record, an occasional podcast. I'm Sam Hardiman of the Daily Memphian, and today I'm joined by two newly minted veterans of the Memphis political scene, Daniel Deriso and Grif, the co-founders of VoteShift. VoteShift was a company that advised and helped run Mayor-elect Paul Young's mayoral campaign. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having us on.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, and so if you both could introduce yourself to our listeners, so throughout this podcast they know who is speaking. Daniel, I'll start with you. Just give us a little background about yourself and where you're from and how you got to this podcast online studio.
Yeah. So my name is Daniel Deriso. I have worked in Democratic politics for the past 7 years. Yeah, since 2016. I started my journey in politics on the Bernie Sanders campaign as a field organizer in Alabama. Ended up working in Kentucky and North Dakota that year, and then went down and worked on a congressional race in South Florida where I met Grif. Since then, I've kind of, after the race in 2016, I moved back to Alabama where I'm from, which is Birmingham, and I wanted to continue my involvement in government and in politics. And I found out that Mayor Randall Woodfin was running for mayor back in 2017. And that kind of got my start into local municipal politics. We were successful in that race. We unseated an incumbent who had been in office for 2 terms in City Hall one way or another for 40 years. And since then, we've worked on races like Frank Scott in Little Rock, Mayor Reed in Montgomery, Mayor Woodfin's reelection in 2021, and now our victory with Paul Young in Memphis.
Grif?
Yeah, so I also got my start in electoral politics in 2016. I had been doing student organizing and work around education and the environment in New Orleans. I'm originally from Illinois, lived in New Orleans for about 7 years, and then relocated to Alabama in part to actually help elect Randall Woodfin mayor of Birmingham. And I started out as a canvasser on the Bernie campaign. Daniel mentioned our congressional race in Florida. That was actually such a synchronicity moment for us because Daniel was actually the last field organizer I hired. And it was a tough decision, actually. And I'm so grateful I did because obviously our paths have continued to cross and we've worked on a ton of races together. Obviously have had a couple wins. But I've taken some time away from politics. I did union organizing, and I want to give a shout out to the Campaign Workers Guild, which was the first of its kind campaign workers union for and by campaign workers. Really proud of that work. And that group is still going strong, representing workers across the country. But we really come from a field background, and we've sort of grounded our consultancy in that direct voter contact work as sort of our primary focus and have really expanded from there. So we could talk about a ton of different races, but yeah, I think that's a good summary.
Well, gentlemen, the reason I wanted to talk to you is you both just helped win a Memphis mayor's race. And so I'll first ask is, how did you come to work on the Young campaign? What was it, just give us the play-by-play on how that came to pass.
Yeah, so Paul was actually talking about the butterfly effect of this with us the last Friday at our campaign brunch post-election. And, he was like, if my sister didn't know this one person who married this one guy who knew this guy named Jared that you guys know, and we didn't go to dinner one night and he didn't trash talk my graphics for my mayoral campaign, we would have never talked. So what happened was that my friend Jared, who we had worked on a couple races with, but most importantly, Mayor Woodfin's race, where we kind of started our relationship, he was with a company called Pine Street Strategies, and they were our general consultants for the 2017 race for Woodfin. He said, "Hey, you got to meet this guy, Paul Young. I just met him last night. He's going to be a great candidate for Memphis mayor, but he needs some organization around him." So got his number, called him as I was driving to Planet Fitness one afternoon, and had a great conversation. He immediately impressed me with his resume, his grasp on policy, and his general demeanor. I was incredibly impressed, and I said, "I want to work for you guys. What can we do?" So over the next month and a half or so, we went through a pitching process against a couple other firms, and were eventually chosen.
And so first, I guess, when you came to Memphis, because this is a place, as someone who's an outsider who's moved here, doesn't exactly embrace the outsiders instantly. How did you get the lay of the land, and how did you get the wherewithal to win this race and really even grasp the problems of the race?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's sort of something we've been grappling with in each of our races. So, you can only be local to a couple of different places, or maybe just one, depending on your definition. But, when I came to Birmingham, it was really a similar model. Daniel was on the ground. We had an incredible local team of organizers, kitchen cabinet members. And so I think that talking to people and finding out directly from them, what's going on? What are the major issues? How does this candidate show up in the media, in neighborhoods, face to face? And what is the role that this campaign is playing? So I think that we really start each race grounding ourselves in the local community and acknowledging that we are not local to the community. So I think that we really strongly rely on relationship building, talking to the people on the ground. And in this case, that was definitely the case. We had two staffers on the campaign who were incredible. Renee Sikander, who actually just got married. Shout outs to Renee, who was our really hardworking, tireless field director. She was just stunning across the board in her effort and advocacy. And Tiffany Day was our campaign coordinator. She was also doing a ton on the ground, mapping and scheduling out Paul's different commitments and the ways that we could plug in. And we also had an incredible team of all local field organizers and canvassers. So those folks obviously did a ton to really communicate with us what they were hearing from voters on the ground. And I also want to shout out the kitchen cabinet, because there are folks around Paul who have known him his whole life, have been working with him his whole professional career. And I think that leaning on those folks and really getting a state of the race locally and really trying to dig deep was huge. And then for me personally, I bought books about Memphis politics. I was deep in the weeds on Ballotpedia, Wikipedia, learning about these folks who run every year, learning about the different dynamics, radio personalities. And I think all that stuff is probably part of what sets us apart. We really take the research element super seriously, and I think rigorously trying to acknowledge that we're not local and we got a long way to go to sort of get that local knowledge. That's level one. That's step 0 for us.
Yeah. And so which books did you read?
There's one that's a brief history of Memphis politics. It was almost exactly the title. So that was one. But yeah, honestly, just a lot of interviews with the kitchen cabinet members. And I would say digging deep into Ballotpedia was some of the main things that we did.
Yeah. And so coming off of that, I guess, what was, as a politician, when you got him, which is what, mid-June, right? Mid to late June?
When we started?
Yeah.
We started on April 10th.
April 10th. Okay. What was the scouting report on Paul Young? What were the strengths? What were the weaknesses? What did you have to fix? What was something you were leaning into?
Oh, man. So I think I'll start off by saying that we were extremely lucky. I think that, there's a lot of things that we could talk about around strategies and why we're so great. But I'll be honest, the main advantage we had was Paul. We had just a truly stellar candidate who was humble, who really knew his own strengths, knew where he stood in the community. And I think first and foremost, you make your own luck by working with a candidate like Paul. The strength of his person, his personality, his character, the people around him, his family, all of that was such an incredible asset. But to answer your question, the state of the race is that Paul had no name ID, but a big war chest. And it's sort of an interesting struggle as a consultant or as a campaigner. In reality, you'd love to have the opposite. I think you can tell yourself you're going to raise money off of this person's persona, their accomplishments, their accolades. And it was definitely a unique position to be in, to have money, but have the community really not know who this guy was. Not only was he the lowest name ID of the top 4, he was lower name ID than the top 8 to 12 at that point. He really wasn't well known. And I think that like the state of the race was figuring out, how do we get this first time candidate who is awesome on paper to sort of understand like the political reality of like what running $1 million campaign looks like. So I think that if there was a hardship at the beginning, it was bridging the gap between this person's incredible base of support. Paul is one of the best fundraisers we've ever worked with. And I wouldn't say like the big dollar was the asset. Obviously in Memphis, there's an $1,800 limit, but he was always on the phones talking to people he knew, those people knew. He was totally a workhorse in that element. So I think that like getting him on board with all of the other elements of campaigning, that was probably the biggest challenge at the beginning.
To follow up on that, I guess, is, he got a lot of accusations from opponents about being sort of the big money candidate. Was that really the case? I mean, when you would look at his financial filings, which my colleague Bill Deriso and I literally printed them out, we killed some trees with those filings. There were a lot of small dollar donations. And so how did he find sort of grassroots support in the city as well? Like, was that the strength of his network? Was that just, y'all, like, what was the breakdown there? Because y'all were nowhere without that war chest.
Yeah, when we started, he already had the most individual contributions in the history of Memphis politics, which is an incredible stat. And, by July, when we filed for the second quarter, we had more individual contributions than every other candidate in the race combined. Paul had that grassroots strength coming into the race. It was his going out, doing these meet and greets, talking to voters everywhere in all parts of the city, and all of the connections that he's made through his work, through Director of Housing Community Development, through President of the DMC, that, when people knew him, they wanted to give, $5, $10, $15. We got some max out donations, but I don't think there were many. I think there was less than 50 total. And, I think his parents' reputation too in the community had such a lasting impact. He just had this grassroots network around him that when we were able to hop on, we were able to continue to amplify and build into, the campaign that had by far the most individual contributions of any campaign in Memphis mayoral history, most contributions of every candidate combined. And probably, I haven't calculated this one, but I would assume one of the lowest average donations as well. So I disagree with the thought that he is the big money candidate. Yes, we had a lot of money, but it came from a whole lot of people to make that happen.
So to the point about being the big money candidate, because that was maybe the lowest and maybe slightest of the attacks that were thrown at the campaign. And, in general, I guess beyond maybe those moments were one of them, maybe there were others, but give me the three, your listeners, the three, kind of most pivotal moments. Where does this, talking about the butterfly effect, if the butterfly flaps its wings a different way, how does this land differently? And where were those moments where it flapped the right way for y'all?
Well, I would love to think that bringing us on was impactful. So in an ideal world, I'll say that, that was a huge game changer, but Paul was really doing terrifically. We're super grateful to be involved and on the campaign, obviously, but one of the things that comes to mind was the office opening. I think that Paul was one of the first candidates, maybe the first to actually have an official headquarters open. And that was our hub, not just for events, but also for community. I think that, when we went to Memphis, our first time for this campaign was for the office opening. We filmed a really nice promo video for it. But I think that for me, that's where it really felt real. I realized that he had this extremely diverse coalition of support. I met dozens of people who were really just pouring their hearts out to me about why Paul meant so much to them. And to build off what Daniel was mentioning about Paul's parents, Bishop William and Pastor Diane Young were really, really impactful members of this campaign. I think that a lot of people even told me personally, like how Paul's parents had saved their lives, changed the trajectory of their lives, and really instilled in them a sense of hope for their future. And I think that, if you've met Paul and his family, they are just the best people. I think my wife wants to be adopted by the young family. We're just like all in on the whole family, and really meeting not just the family, but the whole community around him at the office opening for me was such a pivot point. And I realized that there was like true grassroots energy behind this guy. Not only that, but I think like the office opening sort of represented our beginning of field. And like I mentioned at the start, like field organizing is so important. You know, it's easy to get lost in the sauce of TV and digital and the fundraising, but at the end of the day, if you're not having passionate people having face-to-face conversations, I really believe you're missing out on the most important part of campaigning. And for local office, having people get a chance to like see Paul one-on-one or see, you know, his family members, his supporters, his volunteers, his staff members. In each of those conversations, people are pouring their hearts out, explaining why this is so meaningful to them. So I'd say that office opening really catalyzed the field organizing, this community involvement, and for me, that's probably the major thing I would point to.
That, you know, I think that when we ran our first poll and we realized the gap in name ID that he had with especially Harrington, especially Bonner, even Turner was significantly higher than him. We decided, you know, what do we need to do? How do we get out in front of this? We have the most money. How do we make sure that everyone knows who Paul is by the end of this race? And how do we make sure that we define him before anyone else can? So one decision that we made was to go up early on digital before anybody else. We were up on the 23rd of July. And we decided to run a poll 3 weeks later. And in that poll, it showed Paul leading with 21% of the vote. So a lot of undecided, but we knew at that point that our strategy to run a slow burn name ID, plus field, has really, catapulted Paul's trajectory in the race. And at that point, in all of the public polling, we didn't drop below the lead since. What
about your internal polling? Were you always ahead in the internals?
Oh, in the internals?
Yeah, were you always ahead there?
Yeah, we were ahead there as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So, luckily, it didn't feel like anything was really hitting us as those attacks, started to come out in the end of August, and I guess really in September is when that hit.
And I would say
go ahead,
the
Grif.
third big point, sorry to interrupt, would definitely be when we were getting those attacks. I think that choosing to not go negative, I think ultimately it was an easy choice for Paul, but I think politically was a hard calculus to decide on. And I think that, we really were getting it from all sides. I think we were getting the Republican attack, we're getting the too liberal attack, we're getting the money attack, we're getting the primary voting attack. And it was hard, I think, especially knowing that we have a war chest. We have a lot of people egging us on, hey, what could be easier than attacking some of the weaknesses that these candidates have? I mean, the race started not wondering if two of the top candidates were going to be on the ballot. I think we were hopeful that maybe the right decision would be made that they wouldn't be eligible because they don't live in Memphis. But obviously that happened. There were a lot of easy, low-hanging fruit to pick from. And I think the campaign and Paul specifically choosing not to go that way and deciding to stay positive, that was obviously a huge turning point. And obviously looking here in 2020 vision, it's easy to see that really resonated with folks, and people really felt it was meaningful that Paul decided to just sort of stay in his lane, own his own space, tout his own message and credentials and focus on the positive.
And on that, when you say people are egging y'all on, I mean, what was y'all's instinct to do? He might have, been more patient. Were you making the argument internally that we need to go here? Or?
No, my instinct was that closing ad was him on the playgrounds using the closing statement from the debate. When kind of those attacks really started to come out was that week of the debates. And I think that he closed so well in I can't remember which one was just the four of them. Maybe that was WREG. he closed so well on that one and the one on that Thursday of that week as well,
The
on the
WMC
14th,
debate.
that I was like, that's it. That's your closing argument. You don't need to go negative at all. And he was never going to go there anyway. But, I felt like that positive vision, casting, a vision for a new generation of leadership in Memphis, one that stays above the fray, that doesn't get involved in this messiness. I think that's one that is more unifying than any other.
Yeah, and one other ad I'd like to ask about is the one with his mother. It was a radio ad, I believe, and she sort of addressed the attacks about her son. And I heard from someone who's a veteran of Memphis politics, Gail Jones Carson, that she thought that ad really resonated. I mean, what was the strategy behind that? Was that really to humanize him?
Yeah, definitely. You want to go into this one, Griff?
Sure. Yeah, I think not just humanize him, but we did want to address some of the attacks, right? And I think especially the Republican primary one, I think on paper, if you get a chance to explain to somebody one-on-one, why these votes happen, they're going to understand and walk away understanding this is probably not a real issue. This is probably not going to impact how Paul is going to show up as mayor. But some of our opponents disagreed because they wanted to emphasize it again and again and again. I don't need to tell you who. And I think that having Pastor Diane give her the chance to take the mic and say her piece was really a 2-for-1. We got to have this incredible advocate with a recognizable voice who's obviously deeply passionate about her son and about Memphis, have the mic and say her piece, but also address the feedback or criticism in a way that wasn't overtly negative, and really just demonstrates, Paul's character, who he is, where he's from, and what we're focused on. I think that's the most direct response we ever had. And I think the script of that ad is still really emphasizing what Paul wants to do, which is not get dragged down into the muck and really stay laser focused on the mission.
That ad was also specifically for a medium where the attacks were coming at the time. So I think that was that ad came together within a couple hours after Sheriff Bonner began running his ads, calling Paul soft on crime. So that was our initial instinct right there, was that who is the credible messenger for Paul? His mom, who can tell his story? His mom. And who is going to have the authority to say they're disappointed in these other candidates for what they're doing to him. And it just all made sense that it would be Paul's mom.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad to hear that some good reviews.
Yeah. So to follow up on you mentioned, Grif didn't want to mention them, and then you mentioned one of them. As the stretch came down, the race came down the stretch here, who was the young campaign most worried about? Was it Sheriff Floyd Bonner, who was always kind of running second in public polling, at least probably your Turtles too, or was there a shift late because of the negative partisan strategy from Van Turner that he was sort of cutting into some of the moderates and liberals that were making up the coalition?
I think that we were worried that Van could potentially do that, but it didn't play out that way. And I think that, who we were focused on, we were focused on all of them. It was a toss-up race between the four of them. But we were mainly focused on Paul. We were mainly focused on making sure that Paul's vision and his message got communicated to every voter in Memphis in any way we possibly can. So ignore the noise was, our mantra in the final days. We cannot be distracted by all of this onslaught that is coming. That onslaught means that we are winning. And it in fact did.
Yeah. I think as campaign practitioners, it's the scariest part is not knowing what you don't know. And I think that we had data, we had anecdotal knowledge, and we could easily reason out, each of the cases for each of the candidates. How could Harrington win? Well, he's the most known. He's won the race 5 times. He's broadly loved. Envisioning a world where he wins is totally possible. And, we did that for each of the candidates. And like Daniel said, we felt really confident, especially towards the end, but there is still a fear of, some momentum from the other candidates. But frankly, the way they conducted their campaigns, some of the news stories about them were definitely helping add a buffer for us, but we were really just focused on like getting Paul's message out. And especially once we had decided, hey, we're not going to be calling candidates out by name. Some candidates almost paid just to call other candidates out by name instead of advancing their own message, which it's a curious strategy, but they can spend their money how they want. And I think that, we really were so focused on telling everyone who Paul is, because I think that once you knew Paul and once you met Paul or heard him speak, that you were pretty much on board.
Daniel, I saw a picture of you on election night where you're looking pretty excited. And were you looking at results there? What was that picture? And we're not going to show that picture, but
I was looking at results. That was the moment that we received the results from Central Church. And when we got those and we saw the margin in which we won by, coupled with what we had just found out about early vote, I felt incredibly confident in our eventual victory. It took maybe 15 more minutes to be able to call it. But I think that moment for me was when I called it mentally in my head. And I was so excited. And I'm so glad that Claire, our photographer, caught that photo. It makes me really happy. I teared up a little bit seeing it, actually.
Yeah. And so when you say you get these results, because I think this is something that people were maybe not understanding on election night, but campaigns are essentially sending runners, right, to polling places, and they are getting the poll tape, which is essentially the results from that precinct, it's printed out there. And so what were these precincts? Central, which is at Peabody Ave and McLean, that was one bellwether. What were some of these other bellwethers for y'all that you're really looking for as we're going to determine the race?
You can pull up the map there, but to talk about the poll tape really fast. Yeah, that is what we do. We have folks run around to each polling location, bellwethers, and pull the poll tapes. What happens is the machine prints out a tape that's posted on the door, usually within 15 minutes of polls closing. And then you can pull the results. And if you have someone in a central location, you can plug that into a spreadsheet and start figuring out where your margins are. So in this race in particular, we had all the early vote come in at once, which was incredible. And then we could just slowly put in the results as we got them. One thing I think that Sheriff Bonner's team did really well is I think that they had folks at every single location to pull those tapes. And I think that that's why the night ended so early, is because, he had, if I recall correctly, Perry Strategies, who's like a premier data firm in Memphis. And I think that they were really equipped to know exactly right after polls closed who was going to take this thing. So when early vote came in and they were pulling the precinct numbers, they probably didn't see what they were looking for in East Memphis. And that's probably where it landed. And that's why it ended early. So that's a way that campaigns get results earlier and know kind of like how things are going to shake out. Grif, do you have any particular bellwethers?
Yeah, it's funny. So I pulled up our spreadsheet and you mentioned Daniel knowing. And what's funny is behind the scenes, I was the other voice. I thought the voice of reason. I'm actually looking at the spreadsheet, and by far the biggest box we got reported was Central Christian. And I'm looking at these other boxes. In fact, the next largest box that we have on our sheet was Westwood Community Center, and Paul did not do particularly well there. And I have 90 columns here that are completely blank. So as the early vote came in, we said, that's great. And then when Bonner called, we realized, oh, this guy knows a lot more than we do, because our internals were actually ahead of the county. And so we were feeling good. We were doing better than what the county had represented. But my master spreadsheet was still mostly blank when the sheriff called and conceded. And so that was obviously a huge moment. But, there's so many election day sites in Memphis that I didn't know that the full story had been told yet. So it's definitely hard. And we had some incredible street teams for us and people working the polling places who did report, and getting those receipts was just totally thrilling. I was the person actually filling those into the spreadsheet. And it was exciting to see the lead build, and then the lead crumpled when we got a couple bad boxes. But then early vote was such a relief, getting that in. And, it turns out we won both early vote and election day, which is such a boon. And obviously that was the tale of the night.
Yeah. And so what's next for y'all in your endeavors?
Well, I know that we want to support Mayor-elect Young in any possible way that we can. So looking forward to continuing to, be of any assistance we possibly can to Mayor-elect Young. And, there is a new congressional seat in Alabama right now. First time, new Dem seat. And, we live here and we really want good representation in that seat. And I think that I'm definitely looking at everyone who's running there, because I think we definitely want to be involved in any way we can to make sure that Alabama has good leadership. And we're looking for tons of other campaigns. I mean, we love doing this work. It feels so impactful on election night. I mean, all of the energy and love and devotion that we put into these things, to see it all pay off like that is so incredible. And to know that you've changed the trajectory of an entire city, and that they're going to have compassionate and effective leadership, feels incredible. And I want to do that much, much more. Grif, I don't know if you have a different answer.
Yeah, totally. Just to build off what you said, we've played in the Gulf South a lot. That's where we're calling home. That's where we're comfortable. And you've been lucky to win a lot of races here, but we are hoping to expand our scope. I think that we love getting in the weeds with candidates. There's a lot of firms out there that are happy to do just radio, just mail, just TV. And we really get off on the high touch, high involvement races. Like, we were talking to Paul every day, sometimes for hours and hours a day. And it was so fulfilling to see like our conversations lead to a successful debate showing, a killer fundraiser, an awesome in-person meet and greet. And I think the reward, that you mentioned, seeing Daniel get those results, like, there's no replacement for that feeling. And I think that we're both sort of chasing that thrill again. We love helping underdogs, historic first candidates, young candidates, candidates of color especially. And, that's been our repertoire, and that's what we're hoping to build upon.
Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate your time. And, I'm grateful for the time we spent together, because you guys were always willing to take my calls and, sort of let me bother you and, give me a pulse of the race. Congratulations again. Best of luck in all your future endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. It's been great getting to know you as well.
With that, that is On the Record, an occasional podcast from the Daily Memphian. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community. The Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.